Question 1, start reading over here. Some corals are fluorescent. This means that they absorb one color of light and emit a different one. So clearly this is a comma splice. You have two independent clauses or two complete sentences connected by a comma. That's not acceptable. You either have to separate them or connect them with some type of conjunction. Let's see what they do. Choice B, some corals are fluorescent, which it means that they absorb one color of light. B would be correct if you took out it. That would make it a relative clause describing this whole idea, but it makes it ambiguous and unclear, so B is out. Choice C, some corals are fluorescent, and meaning that they absorb one color of light and emit a different one. C would be correct if you take out the word and that's exactly what choice D does, so that's going to be the answer. The problem with C is that the clause after and doesn't really have a subject. So if you want to use the word and, you could say some corals are fluorescent, and this means that they absorb one color of light and emit a different one. That would be better than choice C, but choice D is the best and it's the most efficient. Question 2, start reading over here. Scientists have learned that shallow water corals fluoresce as part of symbiotic or mutually beneficial relationship with algae living inside it. So the question is, what is it referring to? Where is the algae living? They're actually living inside the shallow water corals. So that's what it is referring to. And notice that corals is plural, it is singular, so this is an agreement problem. Glancing very quickly at the answers, the only one that's plural is choice B. C and D are both singular. Question 3, I simplified the sentence that was written on the other page. Let's read it. By absorbing harmful light and emitting safer purple light, fluorescent corals effectively provide a sunblock for the algae. The algae produce oxygen and other products that the corals need through photosynthesis. The question is asking which choice most effectively combines the sentences of the underlined portion. So obviously they want to combine it because we're repeating the word algae, which the SAT usually doesn't like. Choice A, they provide a sunblock for the algae, which through photosynthesis produce oxygen and other products that the corals need. That one is okay. There's really nothing wrong with it grammatically. This one is a little bit awkward right here, sticking photosynthesis right over there, but we'll have to see what else they come up with. Choice B, they provide a sunblock for the algae. Happening through photosynthesis, the algae's production of oxygen and other products is needed by the corals. That one should just sound weird to you. Number one, this is passive, is needed, so the SAT usually doesn't like passive sentences. And really, this clause here, this modifier happening through photosynthesis, is really talking about the production. But compared to choice A, this one actually makes it a little bit clearer that this process happens through photosynthesis. So B, not going to work. Choice C, they provide sunblock for the algae and the corals need oxygen and other products produced by the algae. This happens through photosynthesis. So what's going on here is, notice you've got three complete clauses. You've got your first one, then you've got your second one here, and then you've got your third one over here, which basically makes the sentence really long. You could argue that the word this is ambiguous. What exactly are they talking about? So for a lot of reasons, C is not going to work. Choice D, they provide a sunblock for the algae with the production of oxygen and other products that the corals need coming from the algae's photosynthesis. I'd say probably the main problem with this, if it doesn't sound weird to you, is what is the relationship of this clause or this idea to the first? In other words, if you compare D with A, what A makes clear is that the algae are doing something that's going to benefit the corals, and they do it through the process of photosynthesis. Question 4, start reading here. However, this finding does not explain why corals in deeper water, where sunlight is less intense, also fluoresce. So what you'll notice is that you've got this relative clause, which is describing water, set off over here by a semicolon and then over here by a comma. So you want to just be consistent, and the only one that does that is choice C, because you're setting it off with a comma, and that's the right answer. Question 5. They exposed a sample of coral to different colors of light, finding that blue light, the most lavish color of light in deep water, only reach chlorophyll close to the surface of the coral. So this is a diction question. You notice that all the answer choices are basically a different word. So lavish is describing the blue light. Now what does lavish mean? It means luxurious or fancy. You can use lavish to describe a color, maybe the color of a dress, if it's purple or fancy. In this case, we don't really want to say that the color blue is lavish. What they're really trying to say is that it's the most common in deep water. So A is not going to work. Choice B, to say that the color blue is generous, possibly could mean that there's a lot of it, but it does have that sense of giving, so it's probably not the best choice. Choice C, to say that the blue is abundant in deep water, that just means that there's a lot of it. So choice C is the most neutral compared to the others, so we'll keep it around. And choice D, to say that the blue light is the most overflowing in water, I suppose you could argue that that might make sense. Overflowing typically has a connotation that it's kind of a little bit too much, or it means that literally something's overflowing, like over the brim of a bucket or something like that. Either way, I don't think that's the meaning that they're getting at, that there's too much of it. So C is going to work because basically it's the most neutral, and really all they're trying to say is that there's a lot of blue light in deep water. Question 6. The team therefore hypothesized that deep water corals' conversion of blue light into red-orange light maximizes photosynthesis in the symbiotic algae, contributing to better overall coral survival. So to simplify the sentence, just recognize that team is the subject, hypothesize is the verb, and this whole thing is describing what they hypothesized. A more simple version is the team hypothesized that something, something, something. And you know in that simplified version, you don't actually need any punctuation between hypothesized and that. So really the only answer that's going to work is choice D. This would be the same as me saying something like, I thought that you looked pretty. I is the subject, thought is the verb. Everything else after that is basically describing. It's really an adverbial clause describing the verb thought, but you don't need any punctuation in between the verb and the rest and that clause. Again, we had said previously that colons are sometimes used to create a sense of anticipation. If you wanted to use a colon, you could say something like, the team therefore hypothesized, colon, but you'd usually follow with a complete sentence. So you could say deep water corals conversion of light, blah, blah, blah. Again, that might be a little bit awkward. There's really no need to put a colon here. And so like I said, in a simple sentence, you don't need any punctuation. So the answer is going to be D. Question 7. After 12 months, the fluorescent echinophilia were deteriorating, but only 80% of the non-fluorescent echinophilia survived. Question says, which choice provides an accurate interpretation of the data in the graph? So let's look at the graph real quick. And we're looking right over here at 12 months. Notice what's going on. The fluorescent is remaining at 100%, like where it started. The non-fluorescent has decreased from 100 to 80. So keeping that in mind, given that the fluorescent stayed at 100%, it clearly was not deteriorating. So that's going to be wrong. Choice B, was it thriving? I would say thriving is a good choice because that means it's living. It didn't decrease at all, so we'll keep that. The fluorescent was higher in number than they were at the start. No, because it started at 100 and it stayed at 100, so C is going to be out. D, the fluorescent were at the lowest percent in the study, so definitely not. They were at the highest, which is 100. So B is going to be the best choice. Question 8, it says, around the 19-month mark, the non-fluorescent echinophilia had dwindled to about 30% of their original amount. Question says, which choice offers accurate information from the graph? So looking at the graph, what we can see is that around month 19, the non-fluorescent ones was actually at 20% right over here, not 30%. So looking at the answer choices, it's going to be C, just based on what the graph says. Question 9, these results suggest that the red-orange glow of deep-water corals might indeed be a symbiotic survival mechanism, just like those of corals in shallow waters. So when I'm reading this, I'm thinking automatically, this is obviously a comparison. What is those talking about? it could be the glow of deep water corals, or it could be the mechanism. So if you had to correct this, you could say just like the glow of corals in shallow waters, or just like the mechanism of corals in shallow waters. Regardless, both of those are singular, so those is not going to work. Let's see what else they offer. Just like the results of corals in the shallow waters. So we're not really talking about results. They didn't really do a test. We want to compare a glow or mechanism. So results, not going to work. C, just like the sun blocking glow of corals in shallow waters, that works because then it makes clear that we're comparing glow to glow. So we'll keep it around. Choice D, delete the underlined portion. So let's read it if we delete it. The red-orange glow might indeed be a survival mechanism, just like corals in the shallow waters. So this is actually a faulty comparison, because if you delete it, then you're comparing the glow or the mechanism to the corals. So you don't want to compare the glow to the corals, you want to compare the glow of these corals to the glow of those corals. So faulty comparison for choice D, and the best answer is choice C. Question 10, the writer wants to add the following sentence to this paragraph. It says, they began by placing echinophilia that expressed a red fluorescent protein and non-fluorescent echinophilia into an aquarium that was exposed to blue light. So this sentence is basically talking about how they set up the experiment. Let's go look at the paragraph and see where it might fit best. So what you'll notice is that the first sentence is the introduction of the experiment. They said to test this hypothesis, they conducted a 2-year experiment. So certainly we don't want to add it before then. But notice what happens in sentence 2. We start talking about the results. After 12 months, the fluorescent eophilia did this, but only about 80% of the non-fluorescent, blah, blah, blah. So probably the best place to add this is right in between sentence 1 and 2, because sentence 1 is the intro to the experiment, and sentence 2 is the results. And this sentence that they want to stick in is basically talking about how they set it up. So really the answer is going to be after sentence 1, and that's B. Question 11, started in the beginning of the paragraph. The researchers hope that their findings can be used to improve coral conservation plans. For example, some plans propose moving the threatened shallow water corals to deep waters, but this study suggests that without the right fluorescent pigments, those corals may not survive relocation. So the question is, how do we introduce this sentence? For example, does seem to work because the first sentence is talking about that they want to use the results to improve conservation plans. And then the next sentence is talking about a specific plan of moving these guys to deep waters. So I'm going to say A works okay. Let's look at the others. Choice B, conversely. Conversely is used when you're looking at something in reverse or you want to contrast something. So really this is not a contrast to the first sentence, so that's not going to work. Choice C, meanwhile. Meanwhile means that something else is happening at the same time. But as we said, this is not really two events happening at the same time. It's more like this is one example of what they said before. D, same thing. As a result implies that the first sentence would be the cause and the next sentence is the result. But clearly that's not what's going on. And so the best answer is going to be A. Question 12, in today's marketplace, there's growing demand for environmentally friendly business practices. So what's going on here? We've got a preposition phrase starting with the preposition for, and then after that, you've got your object of the preposition. In other words, if you ask for what, the answer is for environmentally friendly business practices. Technically, the practices is the object. So the problem is you really don't need any punctuation when you're using preposition phrases, neither before the preposition phrase nor between the preposition and the object of the preposition. All that means is the only answer that has no punctuation is choice D, and that's going to be right. Question 13, at this point the writer wants to present an argument that will be refuted in the next part of the sentence. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? So for these types of questions, you want to do exactly what they're asking for. Start reading here. Though there's limited evidence that greening initiatives increase employee morale, small businesses also stand to gain by going green. A 2014 University of Arkansas study found that the benefits of environmental initiatives were actually higher for small businesses than for Fortune 500 companies. So clearly this is not a very good contrast because the second part is talking about benefits were higher for small businesses than large ones, and the beginning of the sentence talks about them increasing morale. So not really related. A is going to be out. Choice B, despite the incentives offered by the federal government for the use of renewable energy. Again, incentives offered is not contrasted by saying that small businesses benefit, so not related to each other. Choice C, while some claim that only large corporations can afford to invest in eco-minded initiatives, this one does work because they're starting off with the idea that only large companies will do this or benefit, but the study is showing the benefits were higher for small businesses. So C looks like it's going to be the answer. Choice D, as companies and individuals become increasingly concerned about dwindling natural resources, dwindling natural resources does not contrast to the idea that small businesses will benefit. So off topic, and the answer is going to be C. Question 14, start over here. It says a 2014 study found that the benefits of environmental initiatives were actually higher for small businesses than for Fortune 500 companies. So currently I don't see anything wrong with this sentence, so we'll keep it for now. Let's look at the other choices. B, the benefits of environmental initiatives were actually higher for small businesses than the initiatives of Fortune 500 companies. So this is a faulty comparison because they want to compare the benefits of small businesses compared to the benefits of Fortune 500 companies. You know this because the environmental initiatives is actually couched in this preposition phrase, and you can actually cross it off when you read the sentence. So you can read this smoothly by saying, a 2014 study found that the benefits were actually higher for small businesses than for Fortune 500 companies. So choice B is going to be out. Choice C, the benefits were higher for small businesses compared to the benefits of Fortune 500 companies. This one makes sense. The comparison is good. You can think of this mostly as an idiom. So they're saying the benefits were higher for A than for B. And this is the proper form because you're comparing two things and you want it to be parallel. Higher for A than it was for B. So we can call this one an idiom problem, and it's not as good as choice A. Now choice D is interesting, and I was thinking about this for a long time. So I'm not 100% on this, and you guys can offer your thoughts if you want. Let's read it. The benefits were actually higher for small businesses than Fortune 500 companies. So it's a small difference between A and D. The question is, do we need the word for? And what I was thinking was, you probably do, because if you don't have the word for, you don't realize that this preposition phrase is couched within the idiom higher for A than for B. What do I mean? Why don't we cross off the preposition phrase here, because generally we can do that, and then let's read the sentence. The benefits were actually higher than Fortune 500 companies. So what you can see is happening is that if we ignore this preposition phrase, it looks like we're comparing the benefits to the Fortune 500 companies. We're not comparing the benefits of one compared to the benefits of the other. So I think that's the main problem. By adding the word for, it makes it clear that we're comparing higher for A than for B. So it makes the comparison much clearer. That's why I think you need the word for, and that's why they said D is wrong. Question 15, which choice provides the most effective transition from the previous paragraph? So let's read the previous paragraph. Measures to reduce resource consumption can help small businesses both directly by lowering costs and raising revenues, and indirectly by attracting new customers and even employees. So we're talking about the benefits that small businesses can get. Let's read the choices. The original is, founded in 1976, AJ's Auto Repair is a shop that has succeeded in improving its bottom line through an eco-friendly approach. So this one is okay. There's probably going to be something better because really you're just kind of using AJ's Auto Repair probably as an example of a small business, but there's really nothing connecting it to the previous one. We're just getting this random information that it's founded in 1976. So we can hold it, but there'll probably be something better. Choice B, servicing motor homes as well as cars, AJ's Auto Repair, blah, blah, blah. So same issue as choice A. We're just getting some random information about what they do. No real connection to the previous paragraph. Choice C, with a staff of about 15 people, AJ's Auto Repair. So I'd say C is better than A and B because at least this information that we're getting is sort of implying that it's a small business. Choice D, one such business, AJ's Auto Repair in Salem, Oregon. So I'd say D is going to be the best choice because when you say one such business, what you're signaling is that this is going to be an example of the businesses that you were talking before. So this is actually a much smoother transition than just giving random information about AJ's Auto Repair, and so we're going to go with choice D. Question 16, which choice best maintains the tone and style of the passage? By burning used oil for heat instead of chucking it out, the company saves up to $10,000 per year. So chucking it out definitely is not going to work. It's very informal language. When you chuck something out, it basically means that you're throwing it out. It's usually used in spoken language. It might be like borderline slang. Either way, it doesn't really go along with the rest of the essay, which is more formal. So A is out. Choice B, by burning used oil instead of junking it. So junking it is not exactly appropriate because you don't really junk oil. You usually say that you junk an old car if it no longer works, usually an object that doesn't function anymore. So B, probably not going to work. By burning used oil instead of disposing of it. So C seems like it'll work because disposing of the oil is probably the best word to use to get rid of the oil. In other words, you can't just throw it out, you can't just get rid of it, you actually have to do something to it. Choice D, by burning used oil instead of tossing it out. So again, probably similar to choice B, it's not really appropriate to say that you're going to toss out oil. Again, it's a little bit informal and it's also more or less used for objects. You toss certain things out of your house that you want to get rid of, you toss out junk. But for oil, if you want to get rid of it properly, you can say that you're going to dispose of it, and that's going to be the best choice. Question 17. Indeed, AJ's has saved a total of more than $200,000 over a 10-year period from its greening efforts. So what you should notice about this is you don't really need to say a total of on top of more than. You can say AJ's has saved a total of 200,000, or you can say AJ's has saved more than 200,000. But using them both is kind of redundant. It's also somewhat contradictory. So A is not going to work. Choice B, indeed AJ's has saved more than 200,000. That's going to work. You basically have eliminated a total of. Choice C, AJ's savings have exceeded more than 200,000. So this is also redundant. You could say AJ's savings exceeded 200,000, or you could say AJ's savings have been more than 200,000, but you wouldn't really say have exceeded more than 200,000 because exceeded already means you're going over something. So that's kind of redundant. Choice D, AJ's total savings have been more than 200,000. Choice D is actually okay grammatically. It's really just doing the same thing as choice B with more words. So if you've got two choices that do the same thing, which are both grammatically correct, go with the shorter one. It's a little bit more elegant, and so we'll go with B. Question 18. While most dental offices rely on wasteful disposable products, Transcendentist, however, introduced a line of reusable supplies, including cotton cloth headrests. What you'll notice is that because the sentence starts off with the word while, that already signals a contrast. You don't need to use the word however because that's redundant. A simpler version of the sentence could be, while I am tall, you are short. You wouldn't say, while I am tall, however, you are short. That basically means that B is wrong for the word but, C is wrong for the word whereas, because you don't need it given that we have the word while there already. And so the only answer that works is choice D. Question 19, which choice results in the most effective transition to the next sentence? So again, do exactly what they say. Start reading here. Green initiatives also strengthen a company's image, which can yield tangible benefits. The founder of AJ's, Bob Anderson, estimates that the company's green reputation has increased its customer base by at least 18%. So increasing your customer base means you're getting more customers. That's definitely a tangible benefit. So far A looks like it'll be okay. Let's see what else they offer. Choice B. It also strengthens the company's image, rewarding the company's loyal customers. So getting more customers is more a benefit for the company, not a reward for the customers. So B is kind of off topic. Choice C. It strengthens a company's image, although image isn't everything. So I guess that's true, but no real connection in choice C to the next sentence about getting more customers. Choice D, it strengthens a company's image, a key component in attracting new employees. This would work if it said a key component in attracting new customers, but not employees. So D is out and A is going to be the best answer. Question 20. The founder of AJ's, Bob Anderson, estimates that the company's reputation has increased its customer base. So notice what's going on here. Bob Anderson is the founder of AJ's, so they set him off with a comma here, but they don't put the comma after Anderson, they put it after estimates. So this is the wrong place for the comma. There's also no need for a comma after the word estimates because this whole part is really an adverbial clause, which is describing this verb estimates. So really the comma needs to go after Anderson, which it does here and here. So D is out, but the problem with choice C is you don't need a colon after estimates. You don't really need to set off an adverbial clause with any kind of punctuation. It just flows after the verb, and so the best answer is going to be B. Question 21, which choice provides a second example that is most similar to the one in the previous sentence? So I simplified the sentence. The company's green reputation has increased its customer base by at least 18%. Keep in mind that was AJ's, the auto repair shop. Then it says, Anderson ensures that the company stays in compliance with government regulations. So obviously, this is not another example because it has nothing to do with increasing the customer base. So A is not going to work. Choice B, in yet another example of their commitment to efficiency, Anderson and his team incorporated oil tanks into workbenches to save space. This is probably not the right example that they want because the point of this paragraph is talking about how the image actually increases customer base. So this is really talking more about saving space, so not going to work. Choice C, some local chambers of commerce offer free greening assistance to small business owners. Nothing to do with how their reputation has increased the customer base. C is out. Choice D, Transcendentis, that's the other company, attracts up to 40 new clients per month, thanks in part to media attention for its green initiatives. This goes along with the idea that AJ's has increased its customer base because of their reputation. D is the other company kind of doing the same thing. So that one actually satisfies what they want in the question, and we'll go with it. 22, companies with eco-friendly practices appeal not only to environmentally conscious clientele, but also to prospective employees. According to a recent Monster Track poll, 92% of young professionals desire to work at a company perceived as environmentally mindful. What does prospective employees mean? I have no idea. As you're reading this, you might have been able to guess that the word they're looking for is prospective employees. Prospective means that they're not employees yet, but they're potentially going to be an employee because they're talking about what these types of people want. So that is choice C, and that's going to work. Prospective could be used for pretty much anything, like a prospective buyer of a house is someone who might buy the house. Respective has to do more with kind of what matches. So if you said we were talking about our respective jobs, that means I was talking about my job, my friend was talking about his job. In other words, it each belongs to us. So not going to work here, not what we're trying to say. Receptive, if you say it appeals not only to environmentally conscious clientele, but also to receptive employees, that's okay. It's kind of redundant because the idea of receptive means that you're open to something. They're really not trying to say that the employees are open to this idea. They're trying to say that it appeals to people who would be employees, especially based on that data from the Monster Track poll. So a little bit off. All that means is that the best choice is C. Question 23. His Moscow School of Management Skolkovo in Russia features a two-story, 150-meter wide circular base, on top of which is placed 4 differently sized rectangular prisms tilted in uneven herringbone patterns of transparent and colored glass panels. So the question is, what is the subject of this verb is? The answer is actually the prisms. So this is an inverted sentence, meaning to say that the verb is coming before the subject. You know that you can uninvert the sentence if you say 4 differently sized rectangular prisms are placed on top of the circular base. Given that the subject is plural, we need a plural verb, and the only one that works is choice C. Sometimes the reason that people invert sentences is if they want to tack on extra information, such as this very long participle that goes all the way from tiled, blah, 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 all the way to panels, and all of that describes prisms. Question 24, another of Ajayi's projects, the Francis A. Gregory Neighborhood Library in Washington, D.C., features exterior walls that resemble a tilted checkerboard. Alternating clear and opaque squares create a geometric designed pattern. So a couple things that they're highlighting on this question. Number one is proper colon usage. Now, colons are often used to introduce explanations, examples, significant words or phrases. The thing you want to keep in mind about colons is before the colon, you generally want to have a complete sentence. After the colon, doesn't really matter so much. You also generally don't put a colon after a verb because that would cut off the sentence and make it incomplete. So yeah, looking at the answer choices, the better place for the colon would be after checkerboard, because starting from another all the way to checkerboard, that's an independent clause. Your other options, instead of putting a colon there, are a comma or nothing. To determine that, you have to notice that this part of the sentence, alternating clear and opaque squares create a geometric design pattern. That's a complete sentence in itself. It's an independent clause because this is the main verb. So really, your only option out of these three is choice D, the colon, because you can have a complete sentence after the colon. You don't necessarily have to. But if you were to choose choice B, that would be a comma splice, and choice C would simply be a run-on sentence. Two independent clauses in this case, not connected by any conjunction. So D is the only choice that's going to work. Question 25, which choice most effectively establishes the main topic of the paragraph? Let's read the original sentence. Ajayi's architecture firm is staffed with professionals who represent a wide range of architectural perspectives. And then the rest of the paragraph basically talks about all the work that he does beforehand. He does research about the locale. He considers the governing structure and issues of social justice. He gets geologic information. He also gets the history of the site and the people. So all this, yes, is about his research. So obviously the original sentence about professionals representing a wide range of architectural perspectives is kind of narrow. It doesn't really capture, the widespread research that he does. So A is probably not going to work. B, some architecture experts have suggested there may be recurring trends. For example, the way Ajayi uses walls, not only to divide, but also to create spaces for public interaction. So again, this is more talking about design aspects, not so much the research. So B is not going to work. C, given that Ajayi will likely design more buildings over the course of his career, it's possible, even probable, that a signature style will emerge. So the topic here is style, which is not the topic of the paragraph. So C is not going to work. D, what is common to Ajayi's buildings is something that can't be seen, a deeply research-focused design process. So yes, talking about his design process and the fact that he does a lot of research does cover all the details that are mentioned here, and that's why the answer is D. Question 26, for each project, Ajayi reviews extensive research about the locale where the building will be constructed. So this one looks okay. Let's see how they want to change it. Ajayi reviews and examines lots of extensive research. So what you'll notice is that lots of, number one, it's kind of informal, but I think what they're saying is that it's also redundant, because if the research is extensive, there's probably going to be a lot of it. So we'll consider this redundant. Choice C, Ajayi reviews a lot of extensive research, same issue as choice B. Choice D, Ajayi examines and reviews extensive research. So examine and review is pretty much saying the same thing. So that's going to be redundant. And really the best choice is A. He reviews extensive research. Question 27, he considers the local governing structure and issues of social justice. The question here is what tense is appropriate. One thing you'll notice is that every other sentence that talks about his process also uses the present tense. Over here, various databases provide, that's present tense. Ajayi also studies, present tense. So to be consistent, you want to keep the tense present, and that means A is going to be the answer. The other reason A is the best answer is because present tense is used to talk about general truths or things that are habitually true, like the sky is blue, that's a general truth. Or if you have a habit or a morning routine, you say, I wake up, I brush my teeth, and that describes what generally happens. The third major use for present tense on the SAT is when you're talking about literature or movies or something like that. So anything that happens within a text, within a book, you use the present tense for. So you'd say something like, Alice goes to Wonderland, Alice does this. It's sort of like what's going on in a book is continually happening. So it's called the eternal present. Question 28. So central is this research to Ajayi's design processes that his architecture firm employs a team of social scientists. Glancing at the answers, you'll notice that the question is, where do we need an apostrophe? Reading the sentence, you know that the processes belong to Ajayi, and so we're going to need an apostrophe before the S over here. So B works. C doesn't work because that would only be if his name already ended with an S or if there were more of him. Choice D has no apostrophe, so that's going to be out. And so that means the answer is choice B. What you'll also notice is that there is nothing in the sentence that belongs to process. So there's really no need to make it plural, or rather there's really no need to make it possessive. And notice how all the answer choices, besides A, take away that apostrophe S. Question 29, it pays to start reading over here. While trying to better understand the story the museum would be telling, Ajayi had become fascinated with traditional sculptures made by Yoruba craftspeople of Western Africa. By contrast, one type of headwear that recurred in the figures captured Ajayi's imagination. So we're trying to figure out what is the best way to start that sentence. And if you read it, there's really no contrast that's being offered. The first sentence talks about how he was fascinated with traditional sculptures, and then it was talking about one type of headwear that recurred. So most likely this is an example of the traditional sculptures. Let's go through the answer choices. For these reasons, again, a little bit vague and not really more than one reason there. So most likely B is not going to work. C, in particular, one type of headwear. So this can work because this is a way to introduce an example or a more narrow focus of his interest in traditional sculptures, such as the headwear. So C is going to work. D, moreover. Moreover is okay, but not great, because you use the word moreover when you're adding on another point that kind of backs up the previous one. In this particular case, I would say this is best understood as an example of his fascination with traditional sculptures, which means that in particular is going to be our best choice. Question 30, which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion? Just remember that we changed this to in particular. In particular, one type of headwear that recurred in the figures captured Ajayi's imagination, and then the headwear's structure, 3 inverted pyramids nested atop one another, became the shape of the museum. One issue I have with A is using the word then. You don't really get the sense that they're trying to frame this as a chronological process. In other words, first, this captured his imagination, and then the headwear became the shape of the museum. Of course, that's what happened, but I don't think that's really the emphasis. The other problem with choice A is that notice you're repeating the word headwear because it's said over here, and in general, when you're combining sentences, the SAT likes to get rid of any repeated words. So A is probably not going to work. Choice B, one type of headwear that recurred captured Ajayi's imagination as the structure of the headwear became the shape of the museum. This one's kind of weird because it makes it sound like the reason that the headwear captured his imagination was specifically because of the structure. In other words, it's tying the second idea to the first idea in a way that they probably don't mean to say. So B just sounds kind of weird, not going to work. Choice C, one type of headwear that recurred in the figures so captured Ajayi's imagination that this structure, the 3 pyramids, became the shape of the museum. So C sounds okay. What they're basically saying is it captured his imagination so much that the structure became the shape of the museum. And became, by the way, is the main verb of the second part of the sentence. So we'll keep it. D. One type of headwear that recurred in the figures, capturing Ajaye's imagination, the structure of it became the shape of the museum. So D is kind of weird because what it does is it makes the whole first part of the sentence sort of a subordinate clause, one type of headwear that recurred, comma, capturing his imagination, or no comma there. That's a subordinate clause, and then the main part of the sentence is the structure of it became the shape of the museum. But the relationship between the two clauses is not as clear as it is in choice C. It also sounds really long to be starting a sentence off like that. So it should just sound weird to you, and the best choice is going to be C. Question 31. At this point, the writer wants to reinforce the main point being made in the paragraph with a quotation from Ajaye. Which of the following quotations from a lecture Ajaye gave in 2016 best accomplishes this goal? So keep in mind the main topic of this paragraph is probably right here, how the research process informs his designs. And then the example that they gave is him becoming fascinated with traditional sculptures and the headwear and how that design made its way into the shape of the museum. So let's read the answers. This museum, Ajaye says, comes into being after a 200-year quest to have a museum to really talk about the contribution of the African American community to the identity of America. So that might be true and important, but doesn't really have anything to do with the design. This is really just talking about history. So probably not going to work. B. Ajaye stated that he had wanted to see if we could create a museum where the figure and the form of the museum spoke to the story from the silhouette, from the immediate perception of it. So this one does seem to work because figure and form is talking about the design, and that gets translated directly into the shape of the museum. So we'll keep around B for now. Choice C. According to Ajaye, we started with the Yoruba in West Africa because essentially the Yoruba were the greatest craftsmen. So also that might be true, but this does not have anything to do with the design of the museum or the design of the masks. So C is going to be out. Choice D. In describing the museum, Ajaye makes the distinction that it's a narrative museum, so it's not about precious objects. So again, here, nothing really mentioned about the design. So all that means is choice B is going to be the best answer. Question 32. Other architects, of course, conduct and rely on research when they design buildings, but Ajaye's body of work has been defined by it. Right now, this sounds okay. There is a contrast between the fact that they just rely on research, but he actually goes all out, and it influences work a lot more. Let's see how they want to change it. Notice choices B, C, and D all create the same problem. If you start the second part of the sentence with however, nonetheless, or if you delete it and start it with Ajaye's, that creates a comma splice because this part of the sentence is an independent clause or a complete sentence, and then this part of the sentence becomes another independent clause connected by a comma. That's not allowed. So the way you fix that is you can separate into two separate sentences, or you can connect them with a conjunction. Here, the conjunction but does that, and so that just means that it's fine the way it is. Question 33, which choice results in the most effective conclusion for the passage? Whether or not you like Ajaye's buildings, you have to admit that they're interesting to look at. So this one doesn't really work because number one, it's too informal compared to the rest of the essay. It also doesn't really capture the main ideas, which is basically the connection between his research and the design and the background and all that stuff that they were talking about. So A, not likely going to be the answer. Let's read the rest. Because of this process, each building tells a unique story, if not about Ajaye's aesthetic style, then about the place in which and the people for whom it was built. So this one seems to work because the references about the place and the people is making reference to all of his research, and then it's saying that that's expressed in the building. So we'll keep around B for now. Choice C. In his career thus far, Ajaye has provided us with many spectacular buildings, each of which has some very interesting features and puts on display his considerable talent as an architect. So this might be true. Again, there's really no reference in here to the amount of research that he does, which was one of the central ideas in the passage. So not as good as B, we'll cross it off. Choice D, architecture firms that don't include a similar research-based approach would do well to consider implementing one. This might be true, but the purpose of this whole essay was not really to give advice to architecture firms. It was really just describing Ajaye's process. So the whole thing was more descriptive rather than prescriptive. And so D seems like it's just coming out of nowhere. And so B is going to be the best choice. Question 34, she held the important political role of high priestess in Mesopotamia's first major empire in the 23rd century BCE. Nothing really that's wrong in the original. Let's look at the other choices. She held a significantly important political role. So what you'll notice is it's kind of redundant to say significantly important political role. You really just need to say that the role is important, not significantly important. Choice C, she held the position of an important political role. So here it's redundant because you're saying position and role. It's kind of the same thing. Choice D, she held a significant political role and position. So same problem here, role and position are redundant. So A is the simplest without any redundancies and is going to be the best choice. 35, which choice most effectively sets up the main idea of the passage? So the main idea of the passage is obviously about her being the earliest known writer. Read over here. The discovery of these artifacts has led scholars to reevaluate the popular notion that the gods and goddesses of Mesopotamian Empire were similar to those of the ancient Greeks. So obviously we're not comparing the gods and goddesses of Mesopotamia to Greek, so A is going to be out. B, keep in mind we are reevaluating a popular notion that is likely going to be wrong. So what's the notion? That the study of rhetoric's history should start with the ancient Greeks who lived 2,000 years after Enheduanna. So this is possible because what it's basically saying is that normally we've assumed that rhetoric starts with the ancient Greeks, but if she were the first known writer, then the history goes all the way back to her, which is probably about a millennia before. So B looks like it'll work. We're going to reevaluate the popular notion that the very earliest forms of writing were developed as a means to keep records of grain and cattle transactions. So the controversy is not over what the purpose of the writing was. It was more about when writing developed and who was the first writer. So C, not going to work. D, the notion that Enheduanna was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, a king who conquered and ruled over the Sumerian city-states. So the controversy definitely was not about her lineage or who she was related to. So D is out and B will be the best answer. 36, which choice provides the most effective transition from the previous sentence to the information that follows in the paragraph? Start over here. Researchers suggest that Enheduanna's writings contain clear examples of establishing ethos, a rhetorical strategy through which authors persuade an audience of their credibility. The importance of religion to the Mesopotamians is reflected in a calcite disc dated to around 2300 BCE, discovered in 1926 when a British archaeologist was excavating the Temple of Ur, and we can stop there. If they want the most effective transition, this part of the sentence is going to have to relate to something about her writings and this idea of ethos. Talking about the importance of religion in Mesopotamia is not really related, so A is not going to work. Choice B, on display in the Penn Museum's Middle East galleries is, so that might be true, but again, no connection to ethos or her writing, so B is out. C, the earliest example of such writing can be found in that disc. So this works because it would be a direct connection to her writing. They're basically saying the earliest that we have it is here. Choice D, an ancient political conflict probably led someone to break a calcite disc. So nothing to do with her writing, even if the fact is true. D is out, and C is going to be the best choice. Question 37, start here. The disc's front contains an inscribed image that depicts Enheduanna's overseeing a religious procession. The back includes her written dedication of the artifact to Nana, the god of the moon. So notice that currently we have a comma splice, two independent clauses, two complete sentences, connected by a comma with no conjunction. Let's see how they want to fix it. Choice B, they add a semicolon, but then they put the word and. So you should know the general rule for semicolons is you want to have two complete clauses or two independent clauses on each side, and makes the second one a dependent clause, so it's not going to work. Choice C fixes that problem, so it is a good possibility, and the sentences are closely related because the first one talks about the front and the second one talks about the back. Choice D basically eliminates the comma, so instead of a comma splice, now you have two independent clauses that are kind of just stuck together with no punctuation and no conjunction, so that would make a run-on sentence, still problematic, so the best answer is going to be choice C. Question 38, it pays to keep in mind sentence 2. One of our most famous is the exaltation of Inanna, which tells the story of a political uprising that temporarily ended Enheduanna's role as high priestess. Later, she directly asks the goddess Inanna to give her back her old job, referring to their personal relationship. And we can stop there. So giving her back her old job is okay. Let's see what else they have. She asked the goddess Inanna to let her have some clout again. So clout is influence. Again, I think you're really changing the meaning of it. She probably wants her old role back. So B, not likely going to be the answer. C, she asks her to revive her hegemony. So hegemony is dominance. But again, I think similar to choice B, it's not directly saying what she wants, which is to get her old job back. So B and C are kind of changing the meaning. They're a little bit vague. So same problem. D, she asked the goddess to restore her to power. So this one also works. The question is it better to restore her power or to give her her old job back? I'm going to argue restore her power because her job is high priestess. And using the language give her old job back is a little bit more informal. It also suggests more modern day companies where you have a job, you get hired, and then you get fired. So overall, to fit with the tone of the passage, restoring her to power goes better with her role as high priestess, and so we'll go with choice D. Question 39, scholars suggest that the use of first person again establishes ethos because she's identifying herself to gods and mortals alike as the author of this song. Now looking at the answers, the question is, do we need commas anywhere? What you want to notice is you've got two preposition phrases. She's identifying herself, number one, to gods and mortals alike. Preposition is to, and gods and mortals are the objects of the preposition. Your second preposition phrase is here as the author of the song. As is your preposition. Author is your object of the preposition, and you've even got a preposition phrase within that preposition phrase. So this is something we've been seeing on the SAT more recently. The idea is that preposition phrases do not need to be set off by commas before or after them. Neither are there commas in between the preposition and the objects of the preposition. All that means is that choice B is going to be the best one because no commas are needed, and that's the answer. Question 40, in addition, as researcher Roberta Binkley points out, her appeal to the sympathies of Inanna and her readers when describing her difficult situation have shown pathos, the rhetorical strategy of persuasion using emotion. So the question here is whether or not we need apostrophes either with sympathies or readers. So obviously the sympathies do belong to Inanna and her readers, but already you're signaling possession because of the word of. If you'd said something like Inanna's sympathies or her readers' sympathies, then Inanna and readers would get an apostrophe, but because of the word of, we really don't need it, and there's nothing that belongs to sympathies, so clearly you don't need an apostrophe on sympathies. So B and C are out. And as we just said, even though sympathies belongs to the readers, because of the word of, that signals possession, so you don't need an apostrophe on readers. If you did, you would want to put it after the S because there's multiple readers, not before. Regardless, the sentence looks okay as it is, and so the answer is A. Question 41. In addition, as researcher Roberta Binkley points out, her appeal to the sympathies of Inanna and her readers when describing her difficult situation have shown pathos, the rhetorical strategy of persuasion using emotion. So this is a question about the verb. First of all, what is the subject of the verb have shown? The answer is actually appeal. It's the appeal that has shown. So automatically you know that this should be singular. It's none of the words in between, because notice we have a giant preposition phrase here, to the sympathies of Inanna and her readers. So nothing in there counts as the subject. So looking at the answers, cross off anything that's plural. Remember, this is third person singular, so it's not show, it's not are showing, and the original is plural, so that means the only answer that works is choice C. Notice also that the answer changes the tense from present perfect to present tense. The reason why present tense is a little bit more appropriate here is because we're talking about a general tendency that this person does. In other words, the tendency is that she appeals to these people's sympathies when she describes her difficult situation and shows pathos. So that's something that happens in a general sense based on her writing. So because of that, present tense is better than present perfect. Present perfect basically means something that's been going on for a while up until this point. Question 42, to make this paragraph most logical, sentence 5 should be placed. Sentence 5 says, when she describes her political exile, she writes, I approached that shade, but I was covered with a storm. So remember that the beginning of the paragraph talks about when she lost her role as high priestess. Then it says later she asked the goddess to give her her old job back, and then after that they start analyzing her writing. So obviously the most logical place to put sentence 5 would be after it tells us that she lost her role as high priestess, and most likely before sentence 3 because of this time marker called later that they use. So all that means is that the best answer is going to be choice B after sentence 2. Question 43, although writers throughout history will be applying rhetorical techniques to express opinions, scholars typically associate the origins of devices such as ethos and pathos with ancient Greece, especially since Greek philosopher Aristotle coined the terms. So this is a question about what is the appropriate tense for will be applying. We're talking about writers, and they're saying throughout history. So if this is something that's been occurring throughout history, the best tense is going to be present perfect, because present perfect signals something that's happened multiple times in the past or something that's been going on in the past and is still going on up to now. Either way, right now it's using future progressive, doesn't make any sense because we're talking about history. So A is out. B is present progressive, again because we're talking about history, not the best fit. C is really changing the meaning because C is saying that they're able to do something as opposed to that they have been doing something. D is present perfect, exactly what we're looking for, and so that's going to be the answer. Question 44, the writer is considering deleting the underlined portion, adjusting the punctuation as needed. Should the underlined portion be kept or deleted? This is a sentence that we read before. Let's look at it again. Although writers throughout history have applied rhetorical techniques to express opinions, scholars typically associate the origins of devices such as ethos and pathos with ancient Greece, especially since Greek philosopher Aristotle coined the terms. And we can stop there. So I'm not sure if I really agreed with the answer. Their answer was actually you should keep it. I was thinking you can kind of take it, you can kind of leave it. So let's look at the answers and see what it says. A, kept because it provides a connection to the information about Mesopotamian Empire given in the first paragraph. This particular portion about Aristotle coining or coming up with the terms ethos and pathos does not connect to the information about the Mesopotamian Empire. So A is going to be wrong for that detail, whether or not you agree that it should be kept. B, kept because it explains why certain rhetorical devices are thought to have originated in ancient Greece. So it certainly does explain why they thought that these devices originated in ancient Greece, specifically because Aristotle came up with the terms. So that part's right. The question is, do we want to keep it or do we not? Choice D, deleted because it fails to explain how ancient Greeks use rhetorical devices. It is true that this part does not talk about how ancient Greeks use rhetorical devices, but we also really don't need it to. So D is going to be wrong because this is not relevant. Or that was C rather. Choice D, deleted because it provides a detail about the rhetorical devices that is unrelated to the paragraph's main focus. So I initially thought D was an okay answer. You know, this is really, I think, a subjective call. Is the fact that Aristotle came up with ethos and pathos related to the main focus. I guess they're trying to say it is if the question is where is the origin of these devices, and then giving this detail sort of supports it. Again, I think this one is kind of controversial, but their answer was B because they thought that it should be kept. Either way, you guys should have eliminated choices A and C for the reasons that were given.